as I mentioned in the introduction of the show, executions are continuing in Iran, and almost entirely, universally, for the same unjust reasons. Why is there no more outcry? So I want to remind everybody that back in January of this year, same calendar year, just a few months ago, right? When the executions began of some of the protesters who had been part of the uprising, there was 2 young men who were executed, if you remember, in Iran in January. Many Iranians in Toronto, let alone in Iran or around the world, were saying they could barely eat or sleep due to the news of the execution. Remember this? The people were walking around like zombies, incredibly sad. You could feel the emotional weight of this around the world in the Iranian global diaspora, and this was making news. It was on the news crawl of the local, Toronto news stations. Executions are happening in Iran. Right now, what is happening is crickets in comparative terms. In the past 7 days, one source that I was reading says 24 people have been executed. On Tuesday alone, 6 people executed. 2 of those executed 2 days ago are Hamid Reza Azari, who was 17 years old. Milad Zohrevand, who was 21. He was arrested during the uprising last year. We are simply not hearing much of an outcry about any of this. Why is that? We may know that the world doesn't care, if that's become our mantra, but have Iranians given up caring too? Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Okay. Pegah.
I don't know if I can say that it's a matter of giving up or not caring. I think personally what I've seen is that there's so many Iranians who are just emotionally exhausted, and I'll even take it one step further, burnt out from, well, frankly, the last 40 some odd years, but more so the last year and a bit. And this burnout comes as a result of so many different things, especially if you're looking at it in the diaspora. You're hearing news, you're dealing with your own traumas as an Iranian, whether you've lived inside Iran or you haven't. You, of course, have family members there, or you might not, and it's just based on your personal experiences. You're being forced to kind of condense these experiences into this neatly package or neatly into your 9-to-5 jobs in a place where maybe so many other people don't understand things the same way. And it's just this constant flow of bad, false, hopeless, saddening information. And at some point, you feel burnt out, for lack of a better term. I mean, I was looking at it, and there's studies that have reported 71% of activists in the diaspora have at one point experienced severe depression and loneliness. So I mean, that stat alone tells us so much about why it is that we're maybe seeing less people be vocal about what is it that's happening. I think that's a very good point, and we've even, as we've talked about on this program, we've even heard from the Roqe audience saying, enough already with the Ghamgeen, like, hey, can you guys just do some fun interviews with musicians again? Enough, right? Even with that said, to me, the delta between the amount of attention a few months ago and the lack of attention now is kind of startling, and perhaps a reflection of where we're at politically in terms of one doesn't want to say it, but in terms of people sort of giving up on the expectations of a new revolution or something. Raha.
Yeah, I think activist fatigue is the word used, and it's like a global thing that that exists when you do so much and you get so little as an activist. After a while, you get really depressed, and I think that's what's happened with everyone actively working on this movement. But on the other side of it is the global climate and how all the attention is now on something bigger that's happening in the Middle East, which is the Hamas and Israel situation.
Something bigger is a value judgment.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean,
That's
there's
true.
a lot of things that might be considered bigger or smaller. But
I'm talking in the lens of global media.
The media, sure, yeah.
I'm not
absolutely.
talking based on what I feel, because
the world's attention is somewhere else.
Exactly, because how I feel or what I view as important is definitely not the same as what the media is covering. Yeah. But I think all of this is playing into Iran not getting the coverage it needs. And that's my opinion.
Bahadur?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. In my opinion, I think a lot of activists, it's not that they don't care. They definitely do care. It's not that it doesn't bother them. It still does. But they feel that the global attention is somewhere else. So once they come out, I'll just go back to last year when I was talking about a lot of things that were going on in Iran. So many people would come to me and say, "What about Palestine? What about the Palestinians?" And I'm like, I don't want to go down that path right now, but imagine right now, aside, people think that nobody cares, right? So that I feel like that's what a lot of activists are sensing, that the attention of the world is somewhere else.
Can I suggest something else too, which is that, I'll put this out there to you guys. You tell me what you think. But, at the zenith, at the best moments of our uprising, the Women, Life, Freedom uprising, at least in the diaspora last year, and we talked about it. I think, Bahadur, you were probably even on the show. Pegah, you and I certainly talked about it on the program. Was walking with thousands of people in downtown Toronto, in Berlin, in LA, in Sydney, Australia, in London, and this movement of people, most of whom aren't professional activists or regular activists, whatever that is.
Exactly.
In other words, that was part of why it was exciting, right? It was a bunch of people who don't normally gather on a Saturday are gathering on the Saturday.
Exactly.
And those people have, I don't want to say that they don't have the pedigree, or they don't care, obviously they do, but those people have a whole set of other things that, or those of all of us have, are, you have to worry about your kids or your family or the economy or whatever is happening, and that the expectation that we could have those people out there in the thousands week after week after week still now without seeing the results. I think actually when we talk about activist fatigue, I think the real activists are probably still out there. And probably do have fatigue, but aren't going to stop being out there because they know it's a marathon, not a sprint. But that somehow we just can't expect everyone in this climate, in this era of ADD and media and all of that, to stay that focused and that galvanized and that activated for that long. Does that make sense?
Of course.
It absolutely makes sense. Sorry.
Yeah.
What I was going to say is going back to what I was just mentioning about, taking into consideration things like your 9-to-5 job and being in an environment, especially in the diaspora, where so much other life goes on. You've got, like you mentioned, kids and family and life and work and all of these things. That's I think what made the last October, November, even beginning of the year, so interesting and so emotional for so many people, was because despite life that was going on every day, and despite the fact that so many of us have been away from Iran for so many years, we still felt the need to show up in the thousands. We still felt the need to stand up for those that we had to be their voice, like the slogan said, And I think that's the thing, is going back to that, it's hard to maintain that. It's difficult to maintain that if you're not an activist. And especially because, again, we hear good news, and then somewhere in the back of our mind we say, well, it's not really good news. It's almost like we've become deflated.
Yeah. Honestly, for me, the only good news would be the collapse of the Islamic Republic. Nothing else is a victory. And I say this, and people are like, oh, well, no, that's not the right approach. We can say like how this happened. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'm happy that certain things happen. I'm happy that this individual is not going to suffer anymore. But ultimately, that's not good news. The good news is this regime being gone. That's the only thing I can actually celebrate.
I think I'm going to simplify by saying last year there were two distinct groups of people. One group started doing everything they can for the woman life freedom, regardless if they were activists, if they were doing it for the people inside of Iran, or if they were doing it for themselves, but were outside of Iran, because you heard a lot of people say, I'm going to go back to that country once this all we win. And there was a group that didn't do anything. Not much has changed for them, and they don't care. But the group that really did it all, they're just so disappointed, and I'm gonna put myself in that group because I feel like I qualify. we're just so hopeless because we had so much hope and we were just getting high on it. And then we were like, we're so close and we're going to get this. And then it was just a full-on face-down fall of, okay, boom, everything's gone. Now, everyone's tired. Nobody wants to... when you think about doing that again, you're like, it's not going to work because...
It's a tough question to navigate, because at the core of it seems to be, how much can we expect of the people in the diaspora in terms of their focus, time, and energy for what's going on in Iran, per day, per week, per month, per year? Knowing that, I mean, it's not a zero sum. It's not like everybody in the diaspora is Elon Musk or like has lots of money and is sitting at a beachfront with a daiquiri in their hand, right? I mean, everybody's got problems. We're in an economic crisis around the world. There are other atrocities happening. There are, even just talking about Iranians and the experience of being new immigrants or refugees, or there's a lot going on, and then there's fear of being, depending on where you are in the world, fear of IRGC agents, etc. So on the one hand, it's, well, how much can we expect of people? On the other hand, the language we were speaking last year, let's be real, was, no stop till Brooklyn, right? I mean, let's, we're not going to let this go. This time is different. One solution revolution. I mean, long before, at least, in the last calendar year, before that was being used for by pro-Palestinian activists, that was the Iranian slogan, right? That was like, we're gonna have a revolution. Here we go. I mean, we were on those demonstrations, so it's a tough one, and maybe the second component of it is a chicken and the egg around the media coverage, because I don't even see, like I said in the intro, even in Persian media, I don't see as much of a focus on it. I don't see Manitoul going, all out to tell us about the executions the way they would have 6 months ago. Now, that might be because the audience is saying, we don't want that.
Exactly.
Show us Reza Shah documentary. I mean, who knows? But I'm not sure which one comes first. But that's also happening. It's just not there. It's not there aren't hashtags that are trending. There aren't. I mean, sometimes I find myself doing a double take, going, really? More people were executed? Like, we're not doing something? Because it seems so absurd, because it was the top of our agenda last year as a global community.
I think back to, 6 months ago, maybe 8 months ago, and even in conversation, there were so many times that it was almost like, there were so many things to talk about. There were so many things happening. There were so many, unfortunately, horrific things happening, that there was no shortage of things to cover, whether it's by the media or demonstrations to attend if it's within the diaspora, or something to even slacktivism to post or share, or that sort of thing. And yet now I think even myself, I find it difficult to even try and search for the news as to what's going on. It's become more and more difficult.
You mean emotionally or literally?
No, literally. It's actually become more and more difficult for me to find a source that will tell me what is going on.
Perfect segue.
Whether it's in
Perfect
Iran
segue
or
to
it's
topic
here.
2. Well done.